Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Dion, the counselor for District 5 and chair of the Finance Committee. This evening, we're holding a joint meeting with the school board and their staff regarding the school budget. I would like to have my fellow committee members introduce themselves, starting with District 1.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna Trevorrow from District 1 and a member of the Finance Committee.
Hey, everybody. Andrew Zarro, City Councilor, District 4, and also on the Finance Committee.
Councilor Dion, thank you. I'm Kate Snyder, Mayor, member of the committee, non-voting.
Thank you, Mayor. We're also joined by the interim city manager, Danielle West. Hi, Danielle. As well as Brendan O'Connell, our finance director. Brendan. Chair Lentz, I'll yield the floor to you for your introductions of your team.
Don't forget about Councilor Phillips.
Oh, my apologies, Councilor Phillips. By all means.
Apology accepted.
Thank you.
Regina Phillips, District 3. Thanks, Councilor Zarro.
And Councilor Rodriguez is here, so I snuck in also. Councilor Roberto Rodriguez, at large, not a member of the committee. And I'll be off camera because I'm multitasking, doing several things, still working. Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto.
Perfect. And
before you start, Sarah, I have to scan this entire screen to make sure I've not misstepped and missed anyone else. The challenges of senior status. Okay, I think I'm safe to hand the gavel over to you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Councilor Dion. And I actually am going to give it to Sarah Bryden as chair of our Finance Committee to do introductions and introduce herself as well.
Thank you so much, Board Chair Lentz. My name is Sarah Bryden. I am the chair of the Finance Operations and Personnel Committee over on the school side. And I represent District 5. Thank you. And then I will also ask board members Opperman, Youssef, and Figdor to introduce themselves as members of the school board Finance Operations and Personnel Committee.
Thank you, Chair Bryden. I'm Julianne Opperman, District 3 School Board.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Youssef, School Board at Large, also a member of Finance Committee.
I'm Emily Figdor, member of the Finance Committee and District 2 School Board Representative.
And I see that we have 3 members of the Board of Education that are not on the Finance Operations and Personnel Committee. Member Vice Chair Bondo, Board Chair Lentz has already introduced herself, and Board Member Russell Better. So I would invite members Bondo and Russell Better to do introductions as well.
Thank you, Chair. Mickey Bondo, District 1 and Vice Chair of the Board. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Aura Russell Better, District 4 member, and not on the committee, but happy to be here. Thanks.
And of course, we have our distinguished co-interim superintendents with us, Erin Townsend and Malia Nally. And I see our wonderful budget director, Miranda Fasullo, online as well. And now I will hand it back over to you, Councilor Chair Dion.
Thank you, Sarah. Mark works well too. If you can't get to count, I'm okay with that.
Noted.
All right, we're going to begin the evening with a presentation from the Portland Public School Board as well as their administrators on their proposed budget for FY24. We began this conversation at the last meeting, but this might be an amended report given certain events that have occurred between these 2 meetings. So I will turn it over to you, Chair Lentz, so you can assign the presentation. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Councillor Dion. And as you mentioned, yes, a lot has changed since we've been in these Zoom boxes together. So I'm going to turn it over to co-superintendents, but also just wanted to recognize Terry Young, our Executive Director of Operations, I believe is his full title, super integral to this budget process as well. So co-superintendents, please take it away.
Great. Good evening, councilors, mayor, city staff, and our board members, as well as the members of the Portland community that are tuning in this evening. We're glad to be back with you to continue working together on this budget development process. Before we get started tonight with our updated budget presentation, I wanted to take a moment to just address a couple of questions that were raised in our last joint finance committee meeting regarding the audit and grant approvals. So first, wanted to share that we have consulted, as I mentioned last time, with our counsel at Drummond Woodsum, and they've affirmed that, there is, contrary to kind of what the audit finding had, there is no approval authority given to the council for any grants the schools may receive. The language of the charter, refers to authority in regards to appropriations, which, I think, as we all understand, has long been held to mean the allocation of resources through the local tax levy. This conforms with similar practice around the state and many, many years here in Portland as well. So I expect to have a memo summarizing their analysis by tomorrow, and we'll be happy to share it with you all. Second, on a related note, there were questions in the last meeting about the federal COVID funds approval processes. So the first thing I'd like to make sure is understood is that all grant applications related to the various rounds of funding that we've had have been approved by the Department of Education, the regulatory body that's charged with the administration, monitoring, and oversight of these funds. These are all available publicly on our website, along with numerous other documents that reflect our engagement with our board and the community about our response and recovery plans throughout the pandemic. In the last round of COVID funding that we received, what we referred to as ESSER 3, there was a new requirement of meaningful consultation in the development of our recovery and spending plans of that batch of funds. So to conform with that, this is why we did bring forward to our board our proposal for the spending of an initial amount of those funds last June, and those plans were formally approved by them on June 21st. And we're continuing to kind of honor and, follow this meaningful consultation process with our remaining ESSER 3 funds through our budget development process this year. So I hope this clarifies, our position in the processes related to our management of our grant funds. And with that, I would like to now turn to sharing the updated budget presentation that incorporates the additional state subsidy that we had learned about just prior to our last meeting. This version of the budget that we're sharing tonight has been approved by our finance committee and is now up for a second read and approval at our school board meeting this coming Tuesday, April 11th. So let me get the presentation up and, all right. So our goal tonight is first to do just a very quick reminder of kind of our budget priorities and strategy in terms of how we've approached the process this year. Then obviously speak to some of the budget adjustments since our last discussion. So I'll hand it over in part to Miranda at that point. And then Malia will kind of conclude with some updates around our COVID funding overview. So as we spoke about last time, kind of guiding our process this year has been to support our students and staff by maintaining our commitment to our strategic plan, the Portland Promise, centering our goals of whole achievement, whole student and people with equity at the center of all of them, being responsive to the evolving context, particularly the influx of numerous multilingual learners that we're happy to support and integrate into our schools. And then lastly, improving the areas of operational effectiveness that we've had the chance to talk about, throughout the spring as we've been working on this budget. So lastly, our initial strategy was, going into our budget process was to kind of preserve core programming aligned to our priorities and to minimize new investments. Our budget seeks to leverage some of our reserves as part of a multi-year strategy to mitigate the impacts of debt service. And then we also are going to continue to leverage our ESSER funds for the ongoing recovery needs for our students and families. So just focused, as the grant requires, around mental and behavioral health and learning acceleration. We'll talk a little bit about some shifts to that last piece in terms of things that initially had been proposed to move from the local budget into ESSER. We have made some reductions and maintained some, but also restored some with the updated, state subsidy. And we'll talk about that this evening. And then most importantly, and not most importantly, but as importantly, continuing to kind of highlight the need in the longer term beyond the FY24 budgets for us to grapple with structural shifts in how we organize and run our schools to be able to address both, the end of our ESSER funding as well as the continued pressure we experience from our rising valuations. So once we learned just before our meeting last week, that we had, this change in our state subsidy, we kind of coalesced around this strategy to incorporate that into our FY24 budget. So our first priority was to identify reductions in the local tax rate, and so allocating portions of the additional state subsidy to reduce the burden on Portland taxpayers. The second was to restore some of the core services, though not all, that had been cut from our local budget, and then to as well return some of the core services that we had proposed to move to ESSER back into our local budget and that have been there for some time. And then lastly, with the available ESSER dollars that were freed up by returning those services to local, we wanted to continue to make some strategic investments, leveraging those ESSER dollars to address our ongoing recovery needs. So on the revenue side, briefly, we began with a revenue budget of just over $141 million in our initial budget presentation. The state subsidy increase that was announced last week was just over $3.6 million. And as you can see, we've essentially allocated about $1 million of that to reduce the tax levy. So that brings the tax levy down to 6.1%. And so that leaves us with a revised revenue budget of $143.8 million. On the expenditure side, reflecting the strategy I spoke about a moment ago, again, we began in our initial proposed budget with an expenditure budget of just over $141 million. The next, kind of set here is the restoration of some of these core positions that we had initially proposed to move into our federal COVID dollars, the ESSER dollars. And so now proposing to return those to our local budget. So that's inclusive of our math coaches across elementary, middle, and high school, 16.5 classroom teachers, which are spread amongst elementary and high school, and then some of our investments that we've made over time in our youth development staff at the high school level. So in addition, the one restoration that we had of initially proposed reductions in our local budget was the community coordinators. So this revised budget reflects restoring them into the local budget for the coming year. However, we did identify opportunities for further reduction in some of our non-contractual cell phones that some of our positions in the district as part of their function, we're obligated to provide cell phones. So we found, some opportunities for some additional savings there. We did reduce the non-personnel reductions, that we had initially proposed slightly in this revised budget. And then lastly, given the ongoing needs of supporting the language development of many of our youngest learners as they're arriving, we've added an additional pre-K dual language teacher that we didn't feel like we had room for in our initial proposed budget. So that ties us out with a revised expenditure budget of $143.8 million. And so I'll turn it over to Miranda now to talk a little bit more about some of the details of the revised budget.
Thank you, Erin, and good evening, everybody. So starting here at a high level, the FY24 Finance Committee recommended budget is a budget of $143.9 million, which represents an increase of 8.1% over the current year budget and an increase of $10.8 million. With regard to tax impact, this budget requires a 6.1% increase to the school tax rate. In terms of what that would mean to the local taxpayer, this budget proposal increases the local tax rate by 43 cents, representing an increase to the school tax rate of 6.1%. And for a home valued at $375,000, that would mean a property tax increase of about $161 a year. And here is a more detailed financial overview comparing now this revised Finance Committee level budget to our current FY23 budget. So we're seeing an increase in salaries and benefits of about $4.7 million, which includes roughly $4.1 million in baseline increases related to our bargaining contracts, net of turnover and retirements, with the balance reflecting staff investments related primarily to supporting new arrivals and to supporting our operations. And that is also net of the reduction to our mentoring coordinator positions. We're seeing an increase in debt service of a little more than $2.2 million related to our BFOF building projects, and $3.9 million in non-salary expenses, which includes most notably $2 million in special ed tuition and transportation costs, about $800,000 for state-approved bus purchases, $140,000 for our ADP contract, and about $1 million in baseline cost increases, net of our now 4% across-the-board non-salary reductions. On the revenue side, our non-tax revenue is now up by about $2 million. That includes what is now a $1.2 million increase to our EPS subsidy, as well as an anticipated $500,000 adjustment to our state funds related to our special ed high-cost out-of-district placements, and with the rest being small increases to each of local, food, and adult ed revenue sources. In fund balance, we're utilizing an additional $1 million from our debt service reserve to offset part of the $2.2 million increase in debt service that we're seeing this year. And we're also utilizing fund balance specifically toward one-time only purchases of IT devices, and for 3 of our school buses until the funding for them is reimbursed by the state in a subsequent year. This budget also proposes a $7.1 million increase to the tax levy, which is an increase of 6.8%, resulting in a 6.1% increase to the tax rate after taking into account the $100 million increase to the city's valuation used to calculate the tax rate. And here you can see the progression of our budget process to date. The first column shows the budget that was originally proposed by the superintendents before the news from the state about increased funding. And that's the budget that was presented to you at the previous Joint Finance Committee meeting last Tuesday. The next column shows the superintendent's recommended revisions, which allocated the additional revenue to a 1% decrease in the tax rate, the restoration of the core positions that had previously been shifted to ESSER funds, the restoration of our community coordinator positions, as well as a slight net scale back of the previously proposed across the board non-salary reductions. Then that second to last column reflects the school board finance committee's amendment to add a pre-K dual language teacher to the budget, funded by the tax levy, which ultimately results in the budget we have before you tonight. So with that summary of the local budget, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Nally for an overview of our ESSER funding, which, as you know, is a key component of our overall funding picture, both for this year and next. Malia?
Thanks, Miranda. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see your faces on the screen. So as we've talked about, as Aaron reiterated, use of our ESSER dollars is part of our holistic strategy as it relates to how we're trying to accomplish our goals this year. And we talked about this before and know that many of you understandably had a lot of questions, especially as it pertains to how we're thinking about managing next year when we no longer have these funds available. So we just wanted to speak to that and then show you how we're thinking about using the money that's freed up by having some of those positions that Aaron stepped through move back to our local budget. So just to make sure everyone understands, the grant requirements dictate what we can fund with these resources. So I know for some of you that's clear, but just thinking about folks who are less familiar or folks in the public, the money we have through ESSER isn't money we can spend however we want. It has particular parameters that define the types of things that we can use it for. So we had an initial set of funds that were really dedicated to and intended for responding to the pandemic. So this would be money we spent toward a lot of health and safety measures related to our buildings, the PPE, all of that sort of stuff, as well as pertaining to remote learning. So there's a bunch in there, but those are the types of things we were initially spending our money on. Then the next set of funds is about recovery. And that's what we have right now. And so specifically, recovery is looking at how we're supporting students' learning loss or learning acceleration that's needed from the lost time learning during the pandemic, as well as supporting their mental and behavioral health needs. And so we've mentioned this before, but just wanting to make sure folks understand that this money is intended for recovery as it pertains to learning and behavioral mental health. And those are not things that are easy to kind of tie off after a couple of years. So we are acknowledging that the need to continue supporting learning acceleration and the increased mental and behavioral health needs of our students will likely go on beyond this next year. And so that sort of leaves us with some choice points. Knowing that's the case, how do we want to think about the money that we have for one more year? And one way to think about it is let's not use it for some of the things that may or may not be able to continue in the future. And so let's not have to cut next year. Let's cut or not make these investments now and leave these resources on the table. Or we can leverage the resources we have while we have them, and then use the next year to start to plan larger structural changes to how we think about and organize schooling, while simultaneously advocating for resource allocation adjustments. And that's where we've gone in terms of our strategy. So our choice is use the resources while we have them because we need them, and then understand that we have to figure out what are we going to do a year from now, which is why we continue to talk with the board about needing to start planning for structural changes this spring before we even get into the next academic year. And I also want to just note that, of course, where possible, we're using the grant funds for as many one-time short-term costs as are needed and allowable. When it comes to supporting the mental and behavioral health needs of our students, as an example, there aren't a ton of one-off tools or things that you just purchase one time. And so that's tricky. And you'll see in a moment, we are adding FTE, but we're very cognizant of wherever possible in terms of what's allowable in this grant. We're trying to put in things that wouldn't be ongoing costs beyond next year. We shared this with you before, but just to make sure folks are seeing this, this is the total picture of the money we've received from FY21 to FY24, and then just gives a little bit more examples of the types of things that we funded with the initial set of funds as it pertains to responding to the pandemic, and then the types of things that we've been spending it on and will continue to spend it on in the next year related to recovery. And so you see things like summer school, mental and behavioral health supports, curriculum investments, et cetera. So in terms of what we originally talked through, you see where things change. So first at the top, you heard Aaron and Miranda both speak to the fact that we had initially pulled $2.5 million of local investments and positions out of our local budget and put them into ESSER. Again, acknowledging the need for this one-year planning period to figure out how we're going to manage this in the future. Those have now gone back in. So you see that reduction there, freeing up that amount of money for us to look at how we want to support the other priorities that we've been naming in our budget process this year. So the investments that are in there now are largely aligned to the Portland Promise goals. Also, you see a significant increase in what we've put in there as it pertains to responding to the needs of our newly arriving students, most of whom are multilingual. We have a little bit more operational investment in there now. And then some of the basic core services, such as ratio-based positions for classroom teachers, are in there as well. And so then many of your questions, of course, questions we're asking ourselves is, okay, so if we're using ESSER funds in this way for one more year, knowing that they'll go away, how might we think of these in terms of things that we acknowledge are in there that are core, things that are part of our Portland Promise strategy, and then investments that we think we can reduce or eliminate a year from now. And so you see here about 2 million of these investments we anticipate being significantly reduced or eliminated. About 4 million, a little over 4 million are investments aligned to our Portland Promise goals. And then just over 1 million are related to core services. And really what that is ratio-based positions. So we have a methodology for classroom teachers, ESOL teachers, special education teachers, and social workers. And so where we weren't able to achieve that ratio goal in our local budget in a few places, we've been able to accomplish that by dedicating about $1 million of these ESSER funds toward those positions. So I think that brings us to the end. This is, I think, a familiar schedule for everybody here. Here we are toward the end in the joint city board review. And then just as a reminder, our school board will vote on our budget, which they had first read of next week on April 11th at our school board meeting. And then just for the public, you can see the city votes on May 15th, and ultimately this goes out to voters on June 13th. So I think that brings us to the end, and we're eager to answer questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions from any of the participants this evening? Councilor Zarro.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. It was helpful to sort of, from the last time when you had just received the news and now had those updates, you can kind of plug and play a little bit more with the numbers. So it gave more context. I have a question about kind of just because I've never attended one of the finance meetings that you have. And so the other day when I think it was the Press Herald, wrote the piece on this, and that, that's how the community learned more about this presentation or this, proposal. The community knew before I did. And so all of a sudden I got all these emails from district board people being like, I have all these questions. I guess, can you help me understand a little bit more about like, what is it the same process that we have in committee here? If folks have questions, if they want to give public comment, if they want, can you help me understand that process? Because at the moment I'm finding myself being asked a bunch of questions from constituents where I was like, oh, we haven't even had the joint committee meeting yet where we've talked about it. So just from it would be helpful for me to understand kind of the process in terms of engagement and folks being able to weigh in and put their fingerprints on it.
I'm happy to answer, but I would defer to the finance chair, Bryden, or school board chair, Lentz, unless you want me to answer, which I'm happy to do.
I was going for the unmute button. So I will, I'll start, and then by all means, as somebody who has been through this process ever before, I would appreciate your additional commentary. Thank you, Councilor Zarro, for that question. And I will just reiterate that this is my first rodeo. So what we've done is we have put out for the community a budget calendar explaining when all the meetings are happening. So when the full board meetings, special board meetings, finance operations and personnel committee meetings, joint meetings, when all those meetings are happening, to let folks know what the cadence is of those meetings, when various groups of people are going to be working through this, very important topic. At board meetings, there's always the opportunity for public comment. If you were able to watch the fun recording of, in your spare time, of the recent school finance operations and personnel committee, you'll see that what we did with that was we accepted public comment specifically because of the nature of the way this is all unfolded, where my understanding is that in an ordinary year, there would have been the opportunity for folks to give public comment at the full board meeting with here is the proposed budget. Because of the update in the EPS subsidy, everything sort of got a little bit sideways. So that's a one specific area in which things transpired a little bit differently this year. That's hopefully that sort of overview is helpful. And I will also let Malia add anything, from a historical perspective that she thinks might be helpful as well.
I would I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you said this, Sarah, but we've had 2 public hearings And so those have been opportunities for the public to come and share feedback on their priorities in the budget. And so those have happened as well, because part of what I heard in your question was just where do we get opportunities for feedback? So those have happened and been specifically scheduled as it pertains to the budget. And then the board will have a chance to hear comments once again next Tuesday before they have their vote.
Thank you. That is helpful, and I think Chair Bryden, your naming that the timing of the EPS subsidy news, which last time we had our meeting, you started the meeting with, we have really good news, but we just found out we don't know how it's going to impact us. And I think that actually might be what kind of made the community, because I've never really had to engage in this capacity this early on. And I think, and I'll just be honest with you, what I'm hearing from people is, oh, this is great news. Why are we not using that to chip down at increasing the tax rate overall? And so, I mean, I'm just going to say what it is. That's what I'm hearing from folks. And so I had no context of, well, this is why, because we hadn't had this meeting yet. So I think the timing of it does make sense. And I think I wouldn't be surprised if we did hear that a few more times. But thank you for walking me through it.
Of course. And I just, one thing I forgot to include is that members of the community certainly can also email their thoughts, so that you can give public comment. And at least in my, so far, I've noticed that there have been emails from community members on both sides of that question. So we've the school board has gotten emails saying, 7% tax increase, fund the schools, and also saying, let's not do that. Let's reduce the property tax increase. Sorry,
totally.
Go ahead.
Absolutely. No, thank you. You've gotten to the nugget of that, which I think is just the timing of it kind of made everyone, it threw everyone off a little bit. But thank you for walking us through that.
Sure.
Thanks, Counselor. Thank you, Sarah. Chair Lentz, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add two quick notes to that, in the schedule, we did have to add an additional finance committee meeting on a Monday that was not on the original schedule to be able to present the updated budget with the new EPS allocation. And so I do think that there was some confusion about why there was a new meeting that hadn't been publicized the whole time, but it was an absolute necessity to get the finance committee to the point to be able to add amendments and move the budget forward to the board and to keep us on track. And the other piece I will just add, Andrew, is in terms of the tax rate, I think that that's something that we've been talking about both in the committee level and as a board, and myself and the superintendents really trying to get a pulse from our community about where people are comfortable and talking about the pros and cons of different rates. And much like the council, we've been thinking of anything between 5 and 7%, really taking into consideration, where inflation is, and also what are the safety nets that are available for people that even a small increase in their tax rate is really going to have a big effect. So really thinking through, it has been a very intentional discussion with a lot of back and forth between people on the board to get us to where we are today.
Thank you, Chair. Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. Co-superintendents. I just have a question about one of the slides that has the FY25 outlook summary. I guess we're trying to identify here, I guess is that cliff, so to speak, of what I'm trying to specifically identify is the ESSER cliff. So these are I guess it's 2.5 plus 5.5. So I guess altogether $7.5 million that are ESSER funds right now that you eventually have to move to your operating budget, or I'm just trying to figure out what the ESSER cliff is.
Yeah. Sure. Good evening, Councilor Rodriguez. We have $7.6 million that we're spending in the coming year that we have to use with ESSER. And what we're saying is of that 7.6, just over $2 million of it are investments that we can say today are one-term costs or things we would anticipate being able to pull back. I think as a good example would be curriculum. So we're doing a big investment in our English literacy curriculum for elementary. And there is some recurring cost to be clear, but that big kind of upfront purchase won't be something that we continue. So of the 7.62, so you're down to like 5.5 million. And of that, we've said just over 1 million are the basic core services to meet ratios for classroom class sizes, ESOL teachers, special education teachers. And then I think the part that will require a lot of strategic work are the Portland Promise investments. And that's about $4.4 million of things that we would want to continue. We do believe those are things that are essential and important to run high quality schools for the diverse range of students that we have. I think an example might be a literacy teacher leader. So we have one person pre-K through 12 for the entire district who's looking at our literacy pedagogy assessment and curriculum. So that type of a position is in there. And I think, to run a district of our size, to have one person thinking about that is something we think would be good. But that's where we're saying, okay, we know we're trying to be really thoughtful about projecting where there might be gaps next year so that some of those bigger structural moves we've talked about as it pertains to reconfiguration, et cetera, we can start to really think through which of those moves, how many of those moves do we need to make to potentially make some space for some of that. Otherwise, knowing that there'll have to be significant cuts and reallocations.
Perfect. Appreciate that. And I think, I appreciate that what you've already moved or reallocated this year is also, looking forward at, limiting that, that bigger cliff next year. So, that's appreciated. I think I also looked at as part of your, when Chair Lentz was talking about being strategic on your tax reduction, how you measure these things. I think that outlook to next year is a critical piece to that. I guess, yeah. I find that also interesting and helpful to know that the school board was looking at the same range that the council was looking at to land at, that 5 to 7%. I think that says a lot about the way that we've, as two separate bodies, have approached our budgets and what we're looking to achieve collectively. So that's helpful to understand that. And also, just to underscore, I think that everyone here is really aware, like both are the city side and the school side are really feeling this acute, needs from the asylum seeker families that are arriving. And so, we're both sort of kind of, supporting the same families, the same students, the same community members, and the folks that are providing the services that are, interacting with these families. We're both kind of interacting towards the same goals. Just want to underscore that, that when we look at these budgets and look at these services and the people that are being supported, again, it's good to look at it holistically as one big picture. So I guess that's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other comments, questions? Mayor.
Thank you, Chair Diane. And thank you, everybody, for the presentation that you've given. And Malia, thank you, especially because you're helping me understand a little bit better. And I just want to make sure that I do understand on the heels of Councilor Rodriguez's comments, which were also helpful to me. So I guess I'm going to start with so as a result of the additional state funding, you were able to move $2.3 million that was going to be funded through federal funds back into the local budget, which includes the EPS, the funding from the state, right?
Yeah, I think it was 2.5, but yes. Okay, so that's good news because that won't create a cliff in FY25. Like that money is already brought back under that local umbrella. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So then what you just talked about with Councilor Rodriguez, the 7.6 million, it sounds like a little over $2 million is considered one-time costs or investments. And then I think you said that there's about 4.4 that will result as this is being currently funded through federal funding that's going to fall away. And so that creates the cliff that we're talking about. Do I have that right?
Yeah. I mean, to be clear, and Aaron, maybe, I don't know if it's helpful to throw that slide back up really quick, because I think there's several questions on this. So it's slide 15, Aaron. Thank you. So can you see this?
Yeah.
Okay. So the first line, so this is the total, that we're going to be using this year that will go away. And that goes away next September, or a year from September. So this first line, the 1.1, that's a part of what would be, what we're calling this cliff as well, because that's just like basic ratio-based positions to sort of do business as usual, if you will, because we run ratio-based methodology for staffing classroom sizes and ESOL teacher special education caseloads. And then the 4.4 that you referenced is also a part of that, because those are strategic investments tied into the Portland Promise goals around instruction, and a chunk of that is around mental and behavioral health. And so those two together are what we're going to have to be looking at when we're trying to do that long range planning, where we're looking at some of those structural shifts. Does that make sense?
That does, and that's exactly where I was going with that. So that funding that's currently being funded through federal COVID era funds, but that will fall away in FY25, is the place where you're going to be looking, starting as early as this spring, for structural changes that will allow you to continue what you need to continue, because you've achieved savings through other pathways, and I think this came up last week, things like high school consolidation, if that were an option, or other things that I think you had on a slide, which is, we know there's going to be a meaningful cliff because of the federal funding expiration. And so rather than just carry it forward and either lose it or need to fund it locally, there would be structural changes that would support the investments that need to be made.
Yeah, you nailed it. And I think the other thing I would say is that we've looked at with our board, there are other variables at play pertaining to the concept, not so much of a cliff, but just of a gap that might occur next year when we look at future projections for the state funding, as well as debt service, et cetera. So there is a possibility that the gap is wider than what we just looked at there with ESSER, because it includes that as well as future projections of additional losses to funding, and then of course the rise in costs and debt service. So when we're looking at those structural moves, we're looking at what would need to happen to potentially retain what we just discussed in ESSER, as well as account for additional gappage between what we'll need and what we would consider reasonable from a local tax basis, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that helps. Do you have a sense of what that number looks like? So if back to that slide that Aaron just put up, if we just look at that slide, you're saying that's one snapshot, but we should be anticipating other need associated with the future projections that you just mentioned. Do you know what that overall number looks like?
I mean, yeah, I don't know, Miranda, if you want to speak. We've been trying to do sort of our worst case scenario look, because we're trying to impress upon ourselves and the board and the community that, we need to get serious about some of these structural moves that will require some serious lead time. Miranda or Aaron, do you have that up? Since I was talking, I don't have that right up in front of me.
Yeah, we have kind of as an appendix in the slides that posted. I can put up that slide. So I think Councilor Rodriguez was referencing that. So I can put that up here.
I think you've got the wrong screen, Aaron. So yeah, I mean, I can talk through this a little bit if folks want me to. So this is, I think we showed this in the first presentation. We've updated it slightly, and we went back to the Finance Committee to discuss this again. But the change in state funding, changes our prospects a bit for next year. It's sort of a twofold change in prospects. I would say number one, it makes a better outcome next year more likely than it previously we were thinking, because this number used to say 5.7. I think it said 5.7. I can't remember exactly what it said, something along those lines before we got the news from the state. And that was reflective of us becoming a minimum receiver next year, which pretty much all signs were pointing to that. And no longer is that the case. We're more likely to have a mill rate decline again next year based on what it tells us that the mill rate went down this year. So I've updated that number a bit. The problem is that it also makes our worst case scenario potentially worse, because the minimum receiver floor is now further away because our funding level is higher. So previously I had the minimum receiver potential EPS loss in this slide, and that was, just shy of $6 million. If I put the minimum receiver scenario up there now, it's going to be, $9 million away, something like along those lines, $9 or $10 million away. We won't get there. I think it's highly unlikely we'll get there next year. So the problem is that, unfortunately, while it's a great outcome that we're at a higher funding level, it just continues our unpredictability and volatility at in terms of state funding. Rollover costs, this is just a kind of a generic projection for year-over-year costs of what we do currently. That's a debt service projection increase for next year. And then presently, we still have the full 7.65 in SRF programming listed here. You could take 2 million off the bat. We just did that exercise recently since I did this slide, so hadn't accounted for that here. So, and then, you saw the other categories of SRF programming that kind of tier the discussion and decision-making there. So this is an outlook, an overview, so you kind of get the sense of the full picture.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And my last question is, with the 2.5 or so that you were able to take investments out of ESSERF and move it over to the local budget, what happens to that? Can you use it in FY25?
The 2.5 that was freed up, you're saying?
Yeah.
So no, we have to use all of ESSERF by a year from September. So what year are we in? We're in 2023. So September 24. Okay. And so that's where we were saying, just in terms of what I shared about Aaron, maybe one last time, just showing slide 14, or I can just say the high notes here. We're with that freed up money, we're putting some into Portland Promise Investments. He's getting there. There you go. You see that 800,000, and then 750 into additional supports for multilingual learners, and then just under 200 for operations and $500,000 for core services. And so that's where, like that core services, $500,000, when we get to that slide, we say, okay, about 1.1 of this is, basic ratio-based methodology, like that's scooped up in there. And then the remaining here, some of that is in those strategic investments that it would be wise to continue if we can find a way toward doing that. And then some is, okay, we think we won't have to do that again. And we were, of course, like I said, trying to put anything that could be allowable that would be a 1-year short-term cost into the grant. There's just, our budget is such that 80% is people, and there aren't a lot of like one-time buy it off the shelf things, let's say, for the mental and behavioral health needs we have. And so some of that turns into social workers or counselors. But in any case, to answer your question, Mayor, this is where that freed up money came, and this is where we're investing it. And that's when I was saying we have a choice, right? We could choose not to spend it, since we're going to have to grapple with what to do a year from now, but we know we need this. And so rather than to just not spend it, we're saying, let's do that and try our best to have this planning process kicking off this spring, to see how close we can get to what we do think we need to run quality schools aligned, and then to advance the strategy. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. And that came through clearly, that that you were saying, let's use this funding now, because what we'll do is we'll face the hard decisions through different kinds of decision making that are more structural. So I thank you very much for the patience and going back through the slides. It helps me connect the dots. I appreciate it.
Of course.
And I just one quick comment to that around kind of the decision making. I just want to kind of, I think it was referenced in a prior meeting. We have been, and I think in our initial presentation talked about how we have kind of allocated resources and reallocated resources to fund the Portland Promise over many years. And certainly, and I think some of the now counselors were on the finance committee when we were engaging in some of that quadrant activity about would we prioritize investments to support the Portland Promise and kind of reconsider ongoing legacy investments. And so we were engaging in this conversation literally just prior to the onset of the pandemic. I mean, the day before we shut down schools, we brought forward the proposal around elementary reconfiguration and then very quickly had to take it off the table. So in many ways, we've had the pandemic curveball come our way, but this is really a resumption of an ongoing process that we've been in for many years about how to reallocate our existing resources within Portland Public Schools to advance, our core priorities.
Thank you, Aaron. Emily, you have the floor.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect segue for what I wanted to raise, which was I was part of that work right prior to the pandemic, myself and Lori Davis, looking at the structural changes we could make and really digging deep on all of the, any opportunities we had to cut costs. And I just want to be clear that there's no silver bullet. The opportunities are not good, and they don't, even painful changes don't save us that much money. So I'm just adding this so that we're all clear-eyed about kind of what's coming at us as we move into FY25. And, and also we're using SURF now to fund work that is absolutely core to what we're trying to accomplish, including, for instance, responding to the audit. So 2 of the new HR positions that we added in order to respond to the audit and segregation of duties, those we're funding with ESSER funds. And there are endless examples like that. So just want to make sure that folks have the full context of the challenge that we're facing.
Thank you, Emily. Any other comments? Councilor Trevorrow.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to chime in to say thank you again for the presentation. It's really helpful to kind of keep all this information in context as we go through the budget process. And I find all of it reasonable and unsurprising. And I appreciate that you're trying to kind of keep the one-time costs in the grant bucket as much as possible, and kind of using the new local dollars to get things back into local funding is good. And I think that I echo what Emily just said, because I was there at the beginning of that process too, and knowing that list, I don't think there's any combination on there that's going to get you $20 million. So that glyph is still very real and still very much in the future. But, it's something at this point to keep in mind and keep on top of as we continue our conversations and our struggles every single year. So thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Counselor. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, wait a minute. Go ahead, Counselor Phillips.
Sorry, it was a delayed hand. Thank you, Chair. I'm also very, very new to this. This is my first meeting regarding the schools and the city budget. And I also appreciate the presentation. It seemed to be extremely thorough with a lot of information. Some I did understand and some I didn't. I guess for me, I was kind of hoping of here's what we want, and here's what we'll take. Do you know what I mean? I understand you're giving us your best scenario, and I appreciate that. I don't know if I can, I'm just going to put it out there. I don't know if I can support an 8.1 tax in the way I understand it. And please believe me, I understand everything that you're saying in this budget is what you need. And I have also tried to be very supportive of the schools, but I can't help but put on my city council hat by saying this is going to be a really, really hard budget on the city side as well. So for me, I was looking for, here's what we want. Here's what we'll take in order for us to actually be able to provide what we can. And so I don't know where those possible cuts may be. And my question is kind of, it's the same, but similar to Councilor Zaro, which is, you're going to go and get this budget approved on April 11th. What does that mean for the city council? I probably should have asked the chair that before we got here. So what does that mean, that you guys approve it and it just comes to us? And then what if we don't approve it? Like, I don't know what happens. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, I was going to speak to the first comment, but not to your question, which it looks like other people. So let me know if you want to. I just was going to reflect some.
Malia, go ahead, and then I'll go.
Okay, great.
After us, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So one, I just wanted to clarify the tax rate that's in here now is 6.1%. So just to clarify that piece. Councillor Phillips. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, we did share this last time. We didn't do it this time, but and we can share these slides with you. But last time we stepped through more of what you just said would be helpful, which is by our priority areas, we tried to make transparent. And this was really, this combined ESSERF and local. We showed here's what we're advancing in local and in ESSERF, and then here's what was requested and not funded, and here's what was in ESSERF, but we had to cut away, because I understand your question, right? Like, what else? And so we were trying to help people understand there's a whole bunch of things that people have said are essential that we've already had to say. It's just, we can't do all of these things. So happy to share those with you again. We just didn't do it tonight since we had done that the last time, but if that's helpful, we can share this with you too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Malia. Councilor Trevorrow.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to kind of give a rundown on the process again, because I'm not sure it was totally clear earlier, but the school board's process does mirror ours. It's just earlier. So they get a presentation from their superintendents first, and then it gets referred to their finance committee. Their finance committee votes it out to their full board. Their full board votes it out to us. They have public hearings at both the finance committee level and the board level. And then once we get it, it gets referred to our finance committee. And then we vote it back out to the full council. And the purview that we have is simply over the overall budget amount. We don't have purview to make decisions about line item changes. And I think that, how they present their budget to us at this stage is kind of, it's within their, it's within their decision-making on how they want to do that. I mean, they grapple with similar circumstances that we do of never having enough resources and always having some kind of a gap. Sometimes theirs is worse than ours. Sometimes ours is worse than theirs. The overall city property tax rate increase is an average of the two, because our budgets are roughly the same size. So I think, just kind of looking at this from the outside this year, it seems to me that the strategy seems to be that they've been following our conversations about guidance, and they're presenting a tax increase that is within range of what our guidance was for our overall. They could do it a different way, but it would have different implications. So I think it's just, cognizant to keep in mind that it's kind of within their realm of purview and how they want to present it to us at this point. And then it's within our purview to decide the overall allocation in the end.
Thank you very much, Councilor Trevorrow. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I guess I could just go home. Chair Lentz.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Diane. I just wanted to add that, like, just to kind of like reiterate some of the cuts that we've already made that are just like such core services for our multilingual students, for the families of our multilingual students, for, you know, like we were looking at additional operations staff to get us closer to like ideal ratios to actually be able to support our district in the ways that it needs to be supported. And we made the choice not to do that because it is so important to us to make sure that our community is supported in this process and that we're paying attention to the bigger community here. So I just wanted to, you know, reiterate that. And then when we got that, you know, that extra money, really saying, okay, we're not just going to put all of that in the schools. We're going to use almost $1 million of that to bring the tax rate down, to really, and like Anna said, like we've really been trying to be in step with the city. And, you know, I talk to Mayor Kate all the time, just to try to kind of like be in alignment so that we are supporting the larger community as much as we can.
Thank you, Chair Lentz.
Emily, go ahead.
Councilor Phillips, I hear your frustration with the process, and I just want to identify, because maybe you've identified it, but if not, I'll identify it, which is that our timing is not aligned. So our budget process is the timing's dictated by the state. And so we always go earlier than you do. And it makes it very hard because you're having to make decisions on our budget sometimes before you even have seen your budget. So there have been conversations recently about trying to align our processes so that together as the school district and the city, we can make better decisions as a whole. Because really it does sometimes put you in the situation of having to make decisions when you just don't have enough information. So I just want to acknowledge that that problem that we have that has existed for years with our process. And I'm hopeful that we can problem solve and work towards a better process.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Julianne, go ahead. You're muted, Julianne.
Might be better. I think it's critically important to remember the comments about how the restructuring is going to be happening, because I think next year that is where the budget will virtually be thought through and realized where things need to be focused on the students in the classroom. And when it gets down to what's going on, whether it be in central office or it be in transportation or it be in social work, making sure that the students and the teachers are getting what they need is critical. And I know I've spoken with Malia and Aaron before, and we're talking all the way from pre-K up through adult ed, which we don't talk about here very often, but it is a critical, important part for the city as far as the economic development. And these are the parents of the students we're trying to help. And so you're actually getting a twofer when you do make things happen in adult ed in a good and strong way. So I think those kinds of restructurings are going to make a difference in how we provide more than just adequate, but an excellent growth for these students. Because that's what we need to look at.
Totally agree.
Good.
Chair Lentz.
Yeah, I just had one other thought, kind of going back to Councillor Phillips' comment, that I just wanted to see if maybe we could make some space for like general reactions to this budget and where it's at. Like, I think it would be helpful for us on the school side to just understand, like, is this what people were thinking? Is it higher? Is it lower? Like, I think that would just be like great feedback to have as a group here together as we move into this next and final version of the budget.
Councilor Zarro.
Thank you, Chair. Chair Lentz, I really appreciate you even putting that out there. I like that. Thank you for leading by example. So the one thing the first thing that comes to mind is, and this kind of stems back to the process and the two different timelines, is that we are not as far along as you right now in terms of, and it's actually even a little bit delayed because we're still trying to figure some potential revenue out from the state. So, for us right now, like Councillor Chavarro said, we kind of advise to the manager, okay, 5 to 7% is where we want to be on the city level. But we're still, and city manager, jump in and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're still going through department by department right now. So we on the finance committee don't even know really what the recommendation is going to be for us to then go from there. So for me, I can give you a number right now that I think is great, but it might be nowhere near what reality is going to be 4 weeks from now, just because of our process. I do think that window of 5 to 7 is great. I think for me, just knowing what we're about to probably see, closer to the 5, if I'm just being honest. And I've supported the recommended school budget the past 2 years in a row that I've been on the council, and it feels strange for me to even suggest otherwise, if I'm being really honest with you. But that's why we're having these conversations, so we could work. I mean, I've learned so much tonight from your presentation alone that I am really grateful for your colleagues and staff to help. So that's just kind of, if I'm reading the room, that's what I'm seeing. However, and there's so many paths we can take, obviously between now and when it's time to vote on it.
Thank you, Andrew. Mayor?
Thank you, Chair Diane. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate the conversation. And I just kind of wanted to jump in with some thoughts about timing and how this all feels to everybody. And all I can say is how it feels to me is that, we're always in these budgets together because it's ultimately what we pass on to Portland residents. And so the schools go first, the city goes second. Sometimes we don't know what the funding from the state is going to be for the schools. Hopefully there's going to be additional funding that can come in to help as a result of some of the work at the legislature. We hope the same for general assistance on our side. So I think that for me, it's all about how do we work together in contemplation of the tax bills that will get sent out, and importantly, the excellent education that we provide and the excellent municipal services that we provide. So, we're working in this tough year where inflation is high and the pressures are big, and we're all looking at the tail of federal funding that has been around for the last couple of years. So I think that I guess I just wanted to chime in with the way that I view this is how do we work together to bring forward a good and responsible school budget that will go to the voters, and then it'll be on its way to the voters before we know what we're deciding on the city side, but we're going to be trying to land an overall tax rate increase that's reasonable for people. So we'll work within that context that's already been established when we get around to voting on our budget on June 5th. And we might not even know the final outcomes from the legislature. So I think we're in this boat together, and it's tricky and it's complicated, and I appreciate everybody's questions, and I really appreciate all the information that everybody's sharing tonight. And as Chair Lentz and I have talked about lots of times, we're happy to share information from the city side. So if there are questions about what we're doing and what we're waiting for and the challenges we're facing, really happy to talk that through, because this is one big budget that we pass along to the residents in Portland. So anyway, that's my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Phillips.
Thanks, Mayor. I agree with Councilor Azzaro. I guess for me, and I totally agree. I think we really do need to work together. And I'm sorry that I wasn't at the last meeting, Malia, so I could have taken a look at some of the other things that were suggested, as opposed to me just coming to this one and hearing that you want to increase to 6.1. I would really be more inclined to be at the 5% as opposed to a 6.1. I know that asking you to cut a 1.1 is a lot, and probably things that you've already thought of that you can't cut. Again, I just and so again, I'm glad we're having this conversation, and I do think we can work together. But half of me is really, really concerned about the city side of things, and even really just raising the taxes in general to the citizens of Portland who have been very clear with us to say they can't afford it. They just can't afford it. And so I do think that we can get to a place of wherever we need to go. And Malia, maybe, from now until next Tuesday, I don't necessarily know if either one of us has time to sit down and actually go through with what were some of the cuts you were suggesting. But I would feel a little bit more comfortable if we were maybe in the 5% range as opposed to the 6.1.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Rodriguez.
Thank you, Chair. Chair Lentz, I guess to give you feedback on the way I'm looking at the numbers right now, as I said, I appreciate that the school board was looking at it through the same the same range, the 5 to 7%. You started at that 7% with the first iteration of the budget that we saw. When you had some additional funds, you used literally 1/3 of those additional funds to bring it down to that 6% or 6.1%. That's literally that middle of your range, which then I'm going to kind of segue to a question. Given the range that the council is now looking at, city manager and Brendan, if we were looking to end between 5 and 7, let's say we also end up in that middle of the range 6% budget, and we've already looked at what that means to us. That's a cut of, I believe it was $10 to $12 million worth of cost savings that have to be identified to achieve that. So if we were to end up in that middle of that range, 6%, what would the total increase be?
So the school portion of the tax levy is slightly more than 50%. It's about 53%. So if they're at 6.1 and we were at 6, it would be about a 6.05% tax rate increase. So we'd probably on the city side, if we wanted it below 6 in total, we'd have to be closer to 5.8% combined with the 6.1 to get it down below 6 total.
And Brendan, just to remind everybody of the number we're looking in order to close that gap from the city side. What did we have to?
So right now, our starting point was we needed to find expenditure reductions or revenue increases in around 13.6 million to go down to below 5%. And it was about 11.4 to go below 7%.
So given that, and again, just to answer what my colleagues were saying, the exercise that we now have to go through remains the same for the most part than it was, when we started this conversation before y'all got through your troubles. So given that, I think I'm comfortable with what you have presented, and with you being at a 6%. And again, I just want to reiterate that the exercise that the council now has to go through to identify how we're going to end up within that desired range is incredibly challenging. As your budget, we don't have silver bullets either. There isn't one item or anything, that's going to really chip at it significantly. So it's going to have to, it's going to have to take some work to get us there.
Thank you, Councilor. Malia?
Thank you. Just a small point that I wanted to mention, if not for this group, just for the community for perspective. When we were originally presenting our budget, we did talk through big picture when we looked at our rollover costs, as well as what was requested. We were the sort of ideal budget was at a 15.5% increase, and I think that dropped slightly with the new resources. But I just think it's helpful to be transparent about the fact that we started at 7 and then we're very aware of wanting to use some of that additional money to pass on to taxpayers. but our 7 was coming from close to 16% as far as what we were looking at. So we went through that process of initially saying, okay, let's put out less than half of what we think is needed. And then we're going down from there as well, since we have those additional resources. So I just want folks to understand, we are really trying to be mindful of that, the taxpayers, which we all are. And so just bringing in that perspective as well.
Thank you. Sarah Bryden.
Thank you, Chair. As I'm listening to this conversation and trying to frame it both for myself and also for the community, I have a question that I'm going to pose to either Brendan or Miranda. So just in terms of how we talk about this, I have ingrained in my head that every percent is $1 million. So I'm pretty solid on that. What I'm hoping we can include in this conversation is what every percentage point translates to for a median homeowner. So if we have to cut $1 million, if we have to make cuts of $1 million in our budget to bring our budget down, to bring down the property tax increase impact, then what does that mean in terms of what a homeowner is going to be paying or not paying on their property tax bill? So what does the 1 percentage point mean on that side of the equation? Not the $1 million in budgetary costs, but in the impact for a year's worth of property taxes.
So from memory, when we reduced by 1% the first time, it brought us down by about $28 a year.
Okay.
With that particular $375,000 valuation.
Okay, so it's about $30 a year for the median homeowner.
Roughly, slightly less.
Okay, thank you.
I think you might be quoting on the school. Yeah, I put together this slide that showed, just based on the FY23 mill rate, what 1% is, tax levy increase, the impact to the median homeowner. This might change slightly based on the FY23 mill rate, but it's looking like each percent on the overall tax rate is 51.04 based on last year's numbers.
Okay. Thank you. That's really helpful. At least, hopefully it's helpful for others as well, but it's helpful for me in terms of how we frame the conversation. I appreciate it.
Any other comments, questions? I knew it. I was going to try to say something. Go ahead, Malia.
I just have this is a true, just quick question for referring to later. So we often get asked, so I'm not looking for an answer, just where you all communicate about this, but we often get asked, so valuation goes up, meaning that we get less money, right, on the state side. So aren't we supposed to, where's all that money going? So how do you all, you don't have to give the long answer now, but how are you communicating about that as a counselor? Where might we direct people who want to better understand that? Because I think it's a reasonable question, because we keep saying the reason why we're getting less money is because of the property valuation, which then leads people to understandably assume, okay, so we must be getting more money. Why is it not squaring for us? So if we're trying to help, I really appreciate the kind of one city orientation we're all striving for. And so as we are getting those types of questions, I guess I would love some guidance from you all. Where should we tell them to go to sort of better understand that? Or how are you guys helping communicate around that? Because I think it's it's a complicated issue and something understandably people want to better understand. And I'd love to direct them to the best information from the city on that.
Danielle, do you want to do that, or Brendan?
I can take that one as well. So, we have a budget frequently asked questions and answers memo, and we've talked about it a few times in the joint meetings and also in our budget workshops. And this year I've tried to tailor that memo to include answers that, pertain to the schools and city at the same time as well. So, in this document, we have question number one is, I noticed the FY23 budget includes 100 million of new estimated valuation. How does this growth benefit city revenues? And so, it tells the story looking at, okay, the school portion of the mill rate is 705. So you take that 100 million of new valuation, divided by 1,000, and multiply times the PPS portion of the mill rate of 705. And again, that's gone up this year, but that gives approximately $750,000 or $705,000 in new tax revenue for school use. And on the city side, it was $605,000. So our portion of the mill rate's a little bit smaller. So that's where you see the local valuation growth hitting in the municipal budget. That valuation figure impacts the total tax dollars that are collected. And it's a moving target because we not only have new growth, but we also have tax appeals. With the pandemic, we had a significant increase in commercial valuation appeals, which we've had to, engage some outside assistance with some of those more complex valuation appeals when a property isn't earning as much revenue as it used to. So that question is question number one in our budget frequently asked questions and answers memo. And we have uploaded it as backup to our council workshops and our joint meetings. So we'll make sure that's up there.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Sarah, I appreciate you asking to give some reaction. So I'll give you a couple of points from myself. One, out in the general community, there's a sense that the city council has to behave as the final check and balance to the school process. Whether that's true or whether they understand the relationship, the net effect is we're called to task if it's perceived by certain quarters in the community that the budget increase was too significant. All right? That's a term of art. I rarely get any email communications or face-to-face communications acknowledging what a great job you or the school or anyone has done in their budget. It's usually a concern that we just can't take one more increase in this environment. And I never see that as an economic question as much as a plea that their psychological safety about whether or not they can meet their own needs and that of their family are being threatened. So when I look at a $375,000 home, the impact on it, I don't know where that home is, by the way. So I think people are carrying tax burdens that are significant. So another $100 here or there does have an impact on them. I do appreciate where you got on your final number, but I've already received commentary that some folks think you should have used more of that windfall. They see it as a windfall, not as an adjustment from an error. To pay down on the tax rate. Okay. Moving on for a moment, I agree with Emily, because her and I have talked about this before. If we could have a process that put us both more in sync, I think that would be helpful. And when I think of working together, that's another term of art for me. I mean, I have no expertise to weigh in on the sufficiency, the credibility of an educational program. That's not my arena. But I can weigh in on transparency. I think that is a responsibility I have as a counselor, as do my colleagues, to say, do we understand everything in terms of big picture money moving through the school department so we can help assess where we might be, and vice versa as well. So this question around the federal funds isn't so much whether or not you're following the rules as you understand them in making decisions around expenditure. It's whether or not they're sufficiently public facing. In anticipation of this comment this evening, I asked Brendan to put together a chart that shows our expenditures of COVID funds. I mean, there's quite a process in how we make a decision, and you're reserved the right to have your own process. But I think it's incumbent on both of us to provide a platform so those line items are published. Otherwise than that, at least for this one counselor, there's a sense that there's a local operating budget, and that's what we kind of wrestle with. But there are other pockets of potential revenue that are expended that are not necessarily part of that public-facing process. They might have had an internal process to make a decision, but I couldn't go check it quickly, nor could a citizen. I think on the city side, we set it up so those tasks can be accomplished rather quickly by a citizen who's trying to make a decision as to whether or not our URSA for COVID money was spent accurately. So that's one thing. And I'll ask Brendan in a moment to put up that chart as an example. And then I just want to go for a moment with Aaron's comment about the legal memo. I appreciate that. Corporation Counsel will review. I always say if there are 3 attorneys in a room, you can expect 5 opinions. So we'll wait and see what they say. And I will say that just because something's been done for eons doesn't guarantee it's correct. An entire legal system is based on the idea that things do change or things need a new perspective in terms of interpretation. So that's important because when I consider the fact that we have a potential cliff and we will share it of $19 million in the school department, I find that incredibly sobering because I've looked at some of the proposed structural changes. I don't think those are going to get you anywhere near that. You know, so when I think of working together, I think transparency in our revenue streams and our expenditure strategies have got to exist. And I share with the mayor, we don't get asked a lot about our budget from the school side. Willing to share with you. And as I said, it's quite available. So those are my comments this evening. And Brendan, could you just take a moment and put that chart up, please?
Sorry, I'm muted. It's actually a question in that same memo. This was a historically significant federal grant. It wasn't just, a few $100,000. This was it was supposed to be a generational investment. So it was 46.3 million. And, we did a participatory process where over 4,000 people participated directly or indirectly. And I just, kind of highlight here every dollar amount we spent. And, for the broad ones, for example, the various community priorities, you can click in and get even more detail to all of the things that were funded, even within those various community priorities. And so that's, again, in the backup to tonight's meeting materials. And it also includes the dates of which the council approved all of these. And you can see that we still have 2.9 million, and that will likely be approved as part of the current year operating budget. And we'll be finished with our federal funds.
Thank you, Brendan. So I guess to recap, the more we can have access collectively to that type of data, it's going to help us prepare our side of the conversation for when FY25 comes. I mean, I have, like I said, I'm really concerned. That's real numbers. That's real big money. And we're going to have to make collectively some really hard decisions to get there. So the more we can access each other's data, which is different than saying we want to review a line item. I have any pretense that we want to get to a place of reviewing line items. That's the sole territory of the Board of Education. But I think as we move forward in spirit of partnership, access to how those decisions are made and where those monies are located and what actually was funded with those helps us more fully appreciate the aggregate numbers. So that's what I want to put out there. Julianne, go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mark Dion. I appreciate that. because that's I think a very important thing that I've heard from my constituents and others, that what is on the budget should be understood at all levels. So thank you for saying that.
Thank you. Mayor?
Thanks, Chair Dion. So I'm looking back in my notes from last week's meeting, and it was actually slide 18 from last week's presentation where this there was a great view into the federal funding. I think it showed all the ESSER funding to date, and I was just wondering if there's anything that kind of parallels the level of detail that Brendan just showed that could accompany that slide. Is there something that could be shared?
I mean, again, we have not compiled it in the way that the city staff has, but all of that detail is available, as I said, not in the same format, not in the same way, but none of that is not available, right? It's on all of the applications for all the multiple rounds of funding are there, and it goes into very specific line item detail. So it's on the finance page of our, new website, which is much easier to navigate than our prior one. So all of that is there. It's not maybe in the format that, Councilor Dion seems to prefer, but, otherwise it's totally available.
Okay. Thank you for that. We'll check it out. The other thing I was going to say is kind of back to the timeline discussion that was happening a little bit earlier. I just want to confirm, I think the next meeting of the Finance Committee on the city side, where the Finance Committee will be talking about the school's budget, is on the 27th of this month. And I just wanted to, in this meeting, ask, do I have that right? Is that the date? Kind of going back to that review that Councilor Trevorrow was able to give in response to the questions from Councilor Phillips. That's the place where the city's Finance Committee will decide what they're sending along to the full council for consideration. Is that right, Brendan?
That's correct, based on the current schedule. We were planning on talking about that in the second agenda item for tonight.
Okay, great. Because I think that, what I'm hearing tonight is that there's certainly concern heading into FY25 with regard to, what's the community going to face. And I'm also hearing concern about just the overall FY24 budget, both, again, from the city side and the school side. What are we passing along to our community, and what can people bear? As I said before, I know that we all want to have a good sense and a good understanding and be able to explain to people, here's what we spend on education, here's what we spend on city services. And we hope that that both of those things are excellent for our community. And we all know and feel the pressure of, and what can people afford in terms of the increased needs that we all have. Our organizations are no different than people's households in terms of the impacts of inflation and the need. So anyway, I'll look forward to that discussion, and that's all from now, Councilor Dion.
Thank you, Mayor. Sarah.
Chair. Going back a few moments to the discussion about federal funding and transparency, I wholeheartedly agree. Transparency is important. And what I'm looking for is to better understand whether the request is for that level of detail historically or moving into FY24. And if it's a historical request, I just want to better understand so that, expectations are really clear and can yield productive conversations. If it's a historical request, how does that sort of influence the work that we need to do collaboratively for FY24? Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. I think the priority is, let's do what we need to do to get this budget done. I think a historical sense would achieve an idea that there could be a comparison about how both parts of the city have done their work around federal fundings. I think taxpayers have a right to know that. And maybe one of the things that you and I can talk about, Sarah, for our committees is coming to terms with maybe the idea in the future that we have documentation that mirrors each other, so that I should be able to sit here. Here's our non-tax-based revenue stream and how it was allocated. And then I would hold one for the school department that's formatted the same way, so that I have a clear understanding how all revenue streams come into our institution, for lack of a better term. And I think that would inform the question. And I just think that to me is working together. Our data and our reports have to have some similarity, because the big pieces of your presented budget that I think make sense. I think they're recognizing real challenges in the community, and we have to address them. So it's not about nickels and dimes, it's about process. And that's why I appreciate that the school's lawyers have weighed in on the question of how federal funds get approved in the future. We'll get our opinion, and then we're going to work on that for a solution. But for me, as one counselor and chair of this committee, it remains an unsettled question, and that's not a good place to be. But thanks, Sarah. Emily?
Councillor Diane, at some point I'll convince you that we are not the school department, but it's a work in progress.
My God, Emily, I try with Board of Education. So many terms I have to keep in this small brain.
It's easy.
Okay.
I just want to acknowledge quickly in response to that we do have different systems, and at the core, we need a process that supports the fact that we have different systems. But I also wanted to mention that we had long planned a participatory budgeting process. We put a bunch of steps in place to move that process forward in terms of ESSER funds. And this is in addition to all the public hearings that we had on using our ESSER funds, but we had long planned a participatory budget process. And when we lost our superintendent, Superintendent Batana, we weren't able to continue with that process given our reduced capacity. So I do think that's an important piece of information to know. I'm sure you remember us talking about the plans for participatory budgeting, but it's not something that we are able to follow through on given the realities of our constraints.
Thanks, Emily. Anyone else? Okay. If there's nothing further from either side of the table here, I would, oh, wait a minute. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Chair. I just wanted to quickly say for any of the attendees that have been tracking along with the budget calendar we talked about, the budget calendar for this evening says there is the potential for a school finance committee meeting if needed. And I just wanted to let the vast audience know that we will not be holding that meeting because procedurally the budget is now with the full board. So the committee level discussions are not occurring right now. So once this wraps up, you can log off. Thank you, Chair.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. All right. What I was going to say is if there's no other comments from the city side or the school side, I would say goodnight to all our colleagues from the school. Is it school department? Am I going to get that right yet? Okay. You're all free to go and enjoy the rest of your evening. Members of the city side, we have one more item on our agenda. So thank you, everyone. Chair Lentz, thank you for your attendance and all of your colleagues. It's much appreciated.
Good night, everyone. Thanks.
Good night. All right. I think we could wrap this up in the next hour. I'm getting hand signals from the director. That's how much airtime I have left. All right.
I said 5 minutes, Counselor. Get going.
I was clear.
One of us might be in a time zone that's still light and maybe even warm.
Well, that's Andrew.
Right?
He's going to go for a walk on the beach as soon as this is done.
I've been up since 3:30 a.m. It feels different than it looks.
Okay. Brendan, why don't you go through the proposed budget calendar?
Sure. So, obviously, we are talking about a delay of the presentation of the city manager's recommended budget. And that's for a number of reasons, some of which we've already discussed in executive session. But also, we are hoping to have a little more certainty around the state of Maine budget and whether there will be any proposed solution in regards to the 70% GA reimbursement proposal to increase that to 90%, or any extension of the one-time funding around asylum seekers in Portland, continuing to see the vast majority of the asylum seeker entries for the entire state. So the city manager's recommended budget will now be presented on Monday, April 24th, and we will begin our department by department budget review on Thursday, April 27th. And that evening, we had planned on having a public hearing and vote on the school budget, which will be the school Board of Education recommended budget at that point. And that would be a recommendation to pass that along to the full council, a vote to recommend or to amend. And that night we'll also begin city department by department budget presentations. But in our prior schedule, that was also the last night of the Finance Committee's review of the city budget, but it will instead be the first night. So we're now looking at May dates. And to keep things simple, it actually helps this committee, and it helps, I think, the council as a whole, because we'll have more time to review the city's budget as opposed to having it condensed into just a couple weeks in April. So I think the initial proposal we were looking at is having meetings on 4 consecutive Thursdays, April 27th, May 4th, May 11th, and May 18th for starters. So I wanted to just talk to the committee about whether those dates potentially worked.
Anna or Andrew, do you have any reaction?
Can you say them one at a time again while I look at my calendar?
All right. So the existing meeting stays on April 27th. And then Thursday, May 4th.
Yep.
Thursday, May 11th.
May 11th. Yep, that's good.
Thursday, the 18th.
Yep, that's good.
And then a tentative on the Tuesday, the 23rd. I'm actually away on Thursday, the 25th, so I don't want to have the final meeting on that night when I'm not around.
Tuesday, the 23rd. The only thing it looks like there's a team building workshop executive session on our schedule for 5 p.m.
That we need to cancel that. I'll take a look.
Who needs
Other than that, I'm good.
Yeah, those are all good for me except for the 11th until 6 p.m. So if the meeting can be a little bit later, if it can start at 6, then I'm fine.
What's scheduled on the 11th, Brendan?
So we haven't scheduled all the department heads yet. We wanted to make sure that these dates were okay with the committee. But, understanding Councilor Zaro's conflict and any other conflicts that may arise, we could potentially, structure things around departments that might not be controversial between 5 and 6. If we opted to not start till 6, that's fine as well.
Mayor?
Oh, I had the elusive sneeze that never happened. Is based on this, Brendan, is May 23rd the date that the council or the committee would vote their recommendation out to the council?
The 23rd. Yeah. Yes, I think that is the proposal. We could potentially push things out even one more Thursday beyond the 25th to June 1st, but that is likely not preferable with everyone in Corporation Council because, then there's just a mad rush if there's any amendments to change all the orders. So the 23rd gives us a little more time to potentially do that.
Thank you.
And just to verify, because it looks like it's not on my calendar anymore, we're not meeting next Tuesday?
Nope.
Okay.
No meeting. There were meetings scheduled on the 11th, 13th, 25th, 27th. And the only date that's remaining there is the 27th.
Okay, perfect.
And the city managers, the budget will go in front of the full council instead of on May 1st and May 15th. It will now be May 15th and June 1st. So the council will still have the opportunity to see both the city and the school budget at the same time. They just won't know if the finance committee makes any potential changes to the city manager's recommended budget at the time they're voting on the school budget.
Okay.
All right. Mayor, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm just being a little lazy here by asking this question, but Brendan, can you remind me of when the Finance Committee would be voting the school budget out for the council's consideration?
So that would be April 27th.
Okay, so the 27th, and then it'll hit the May 1st meeting agenda. Okay, thank you.
Good. Any other comments? Councilor Zarro, anything else?
No, all those other days work for me.
Okay. And you're all set, Councilor Trevorrow? And I will make myself available for all those dates as well, Brendan. Unless you have any choice in the matter, but I'll make a commitment to be there. Okay, if that's the case, nothing from the mayor or the manager, I would seek a motion to end the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilor Trevorrow, seconded by Councilor Zarro. I'll take the roll. Councilor Trevorrow.
Yes.
Councilor Zarro.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. This meeting has now come to an end. Thank you, everyone. See you all soon. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.